General Audience number 29 of June 4th, 1980. Section B, Insatiability of the Union. Corruption of the consciousness of the unitive meaning of the body. When we spoke about the birth of concupiscence in man, on the basis of Genesis, we analyzed the original meaning of shame, the shame which appeared with the first sin. The analysis of shame in the light of the biblical account allows us to understand even more thoroughly and deeply what meaning it has for all interpersonal relationships between man and woman. Genesis chapter 3 shows without any doubt that shame appeared in the reciprocal relationship between man and woman, and that this relationship underwent a radical transformation due to shame in particular. And because shame was born in their hearts together with the concupiscence of the body, the analysis of original shame allows us at the same time to examine in what relation this concupiscence stands to the communion of persons that has from the beginning been granted and assigned as a task to man and woman by their being created in the image of God. Thus, the next stage of our study of concupiscence, which manifested itself at the beginning through the shame of the man and the woman, according to Genesis chapter 3, is the analysis of the insatiability of the union, that is, of the communion of persons, that was to be expressed also by their bodies according to their specific masculinity and femininity. Above all, therefore, that shame, which according to the biblical narrative makes the man and the woman hide their own bodies before each other, and especially their sexual differentiation, confirms that the original power of communicating themselves to each other, about which Genesis chapter 2 verse 25 speaks, has been shattered. The radical change in the original meaning of nakedness lets us presume negative changes in the whole interpersonal relation between a man and woman. That reciprocal communion in humanity itself, through the body, and through its masculinity and femininity, which had such a strong echo in the earlier passage of the Yahweh's narrative, see Genesis chapter 2, verse 23 to 25, is overturned at this moment, as if the body in its masculinity and femininity ceased to be free from suspicion, as the substratum of the communion of persons, as if its original function were called into doubt in the consciousness of the man and the woman. What disappears is the simplicity and purity of their original experience, which helped to bring about a singular fullness of mutual self-communication. Obviously, the first parents did not stop communicating with each other through the body and its movements, gestures, and expressions, but what disappeared was the simple and direct self-communion connected with the original experience of reciprocal nakedness. Almost unexpectedly, an insurmountable threshold appeared in their consciousness that limited the original self-donation to the other with full trust in all that constituted one's own identity and at the same time diversity, female on the one side, male on the other. The diversity, or the difference between the male and female sexes, was abruptly sensed and understood as an element of the mutual opposition of persons. This is attested to by the concise expression of Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, they realized that they were naked, and by its immediate context. All of this is also part of the analysis of the first shame. Genesis not only sketches its origin in the human being, but allows one to show its degrees in both man and woman. The ending of the power of a full reciprocal communion, a closure that manifested itself as sexual shame, allows us to understand better the original value of the unifying meaning of the body. It is, in fact, not possible otherwise to understand that closure to each other, or shame, except in reference to the meaning that the body, in its femininity and masculinity, previously had for man in the state of original innocence. That unifying meaning should be understood not only in reference to the unity that the man and the woman were to constitute as spouses by becoming one flesh, Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, through the conjugal act, but also in reference to the communion of persons itself, which was the proper dimension of the existence of man and woman in the mystery of creation. In its masculinity and femininity, the body was the specific substratum of such personal communion. Sexual shame, about which Genesis chapter 3, verse 7 speaks, attests to the loss of the original certainty that through its masculinity and femininity, the human body is precisely the substratum of the communion of persons, a substratum that simply expresses this communion and serves to realize it, and thus also to complete the image of God in the visible world. This state of consciousness of both has strong repercussions in the further context of Genesis chapter 3, with which we will occupy ourselves in a short while. Since after original sin, man had lost the sense, so to speak, of the image of God in himself, that loss manifested itself by shame See especially Genesis chapter 3, verse 10 to 11. That shame invading the man-woman relationship as a whole was manifested through the imbalance of the original meaning of bodily unity. That is, through the imbalance of the body as a specific substratum of the communion of persons. It is as if the personal profile of masculinity and femininity, which before had highlighted the meaning of the body for a full communion of persons, had given up its place to the mere sensation of sexuality with regard to the other human being. It is as if sexuality became an obstacle in man's personal relationship with woman. While according to Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, they hide their sexuality from each other, both express it almost instinctively. A deeper dimension of shame. This discovery is at the same time a sort of second discovery of sex, which in the biblical narrative differs radically from the first. The whole context of the narrative confirms that this new discovery distinguishes the historical man of concupiscence, more precisely the man of the threefold concupiscence, from the man of original innocence. In what relation does concupiscence, and in particular the concupiscence of the flesh, stand to the communion of persons mediated by the body, by its masculinity and femininity assigned from the beginning of man by the Creator? This is the question that must be asked, precisely about the beginning, about the experience of shame that the biblical text refers to. The narrative of Genesis chapter 3, as we have already observed, manifests shame as the symptom of man's detachment from love, in which he participated in the mystery of creation according to the Johannine expression, that which comes from the Father. That which is in the world, namely concupiscence, brings with it an almost constitutive difficulty in identifying oneself with one's own body, not only in the sphere of one's own subjectivity, but even more so in regard to the subjectivity of the other human being, of woman for man and man for woman. Hence the necessity of hiding oneself before the other with one's body, with what determines one's own femininity or masculinity. This necessity shows the fundamental lack of trust, which already in itself points to the collapse of the original relationship of communion. It is precisely regard for the subjectivity of the other and at the same time for one's own subjectivity that has given rise in this new situation, that is, in the context of concupiscence, to the need for hiding oneself, about which Genesis chapter 3 verse 7 speaks. And precisely here, it seems to us, we discover a deeper meaning of sexual shame, and also the full meaning of that phenomenon to which the biblical text appeals to highlight the boundary between the man of original innocence and the historical man of concupiscence. The text of Genesis chapter 3 as a whole provides us with elements to define the deepest dimension of shame, but this calls for a separate analysis. We will begin it in the next meditation.